Hey guys, Ace and Egg here. The question I get from a lot of my friends is how I do music composition. I won't be answering that question in this video, but I like comparing music composition to writing an essay because most of my friends have written an essay before for school, so using analogies like that helps them understand how I do what I do. Thanks to last week, I now have a video on how to write an essay, or at least how I write an essay, and how I think you should be writing your essays. Sorry for the narcissism. Alright, so this is the structure of how to make a composition compared to writing an essay. You have all the stuff that builds up to a composition from the bottom up. Just like writing an essay, you are responsible for every little pitch in your composition. There are no accidents in including a pitch, unless if you're using an F sharp, for example. If I point to any note in your composition, you should be able to tell me what the purpose of that pitch is. Let's take this word for example. What is this? It's the letter G. It's responsible for the G sound in egg. Listen to the word, egg. Hear the G sound? I feel like I'm teaching a kid how to read. How low am I willing to go? Never mind. With the pitch, you want to be able to say that that's a passing tone, or that pitch is part of a chord. Or simply because it sounds like it flows with the melody well in the context in which it appears, that's actually the best reason. Moving on to my next point, in a sentence, you have your subject, verb, and object. When composing music, a typical approach is to play the subdominant, dominant, and tonic. In this example, your verb is the dominant. Verbs imply action, and dominants are unstable and usually goes to the tonic. When I tell people to write an essay, I tell them to write an outline first. I'm going to be honest, I don't write outlines for compositions, and I'm not going to advocate or reject the idea for using an outline. But just because I don't use an outline, it doesn't mean that my compositions can be disorganized. A composition needs to have an introduction, body, and conclusion, just like an essay. I usually start composing by singing a melody that sounds good. I just jump right into it. I don't do any preparation beforehand. I hum whatever is in my head and what sounds good, and I write it down. Then I copy and paste that melody a few times and I alter it every time it's played, just like an essay. Wait, that's a bad thing to admit. Please don't tell my teachers. This is why I use initials rather than my full name on the internet. Genius! The motif is the question I'm trying to answer in the composition. I might bring up different answers to the question. It might be reworded many times throughout the composition. This is kind of like the main points of your essay. Everything else is just an embellishment of that main idea. And if I ever run out of ideas when composing, I usually go back to the motif. I'll beat the motif up and take advantage of every possible outcome until I have too many ideas. Then I'll reduce my composition down to something more manageable to listen. In the introduction, I like to introduce the motif. It's usually a slower version of the motif or a very basic version of the motif. Maybe it's played on a different instrument. Anyways, the introduction needs to prepare the listener for what's to come in the following composition, kind of like an essay. And the conclusion needs to wrap up the composition. You want your conclusion to sound like the piece is ending. If you play your motif many times throughout the composition, in your conclusion, you want your motif to play differently. In an essay, you want your conclusion to restate the thesis and wrap up the main points. You also want to state your implications, but I don't see how you would do that in music composition. Use the motif one last time here unless you want to be really stereotypical and have the motif endlessly play on repeat, getting quieter every time you play it. And when you write an essay, you usually write it in a way that you're comfortable with, right? You follow the rules of your perception of grammar. For example, I use the active voice in writing since there are a lot of stupid rules in passive voice and it's a nightmare to work with. It seems that every time I use the passive voice, I mess up on the grammar. This is true in music composition as well. You want to keep it simple. You might look up one or two words to make your essay sound more professional, but that's it. Otherwise, the person listening to your composition might need to pull out a dictionary to comprehend it, or they'll just stop listening. But hey, if they have access to your music, that probably means that they already paid you to access your music, so you might not have to worry about it as much. Seriously, keep it simple and don't compose anything beyond your skill level. Rather, work your way up in complexity in increments. I'm sure there are more ways composing music is like writing an essay, but we are out of time, and I'll see you next time on Sesame Street. I mean Ace and Egg 518. Darn.